Happy New Year. We're approaching 2012 in a matter of hours now, and everybody says this is the most important election of our time, and they're right, it is. We cannot survive 4 more years of Barack Obama as president. But I thought as we move into this election year, we'd cast our minds back to previous elections in our history and look at other elections that were critically important for the United States. I think the most important, first important election we had was in 1800, when Thomas Jefferson defeated John Adams, because that was a change in party control of the government. Washington was elected without parties, but then as his administration went on, he became clearly a Federalist, allied with Adams and Hamilton and a bunch of other people against Jefferson and Madison and Monroe. And in 1800, the parties ran against each other, as they had in 1796. But this time, Jefferson won. In 1796, he lost. And there was a peaceful transition from one party to the other. Everybody in the Federalists said the country is going to be destroyed. But it wasn't. And this precedent was set up for a peaceful transfer of power. I think the next important election, and undoubtedly the single most important election in American history, was 1860, when Lincoln ran for president against a divided Democratic Party. The Southerners chose Breckinridge, who was the vice president. The Northerners chose Stephen Douglas, who Lincoln had lost to in the Illinois Senate race 2 years before. And the border states chose John Bell, candidate of what they called the Constitution Party. But essentially what it was a question of whether in the North, the Northern voters would vote for the Democratic Party and Union and a policy of appeasement toward the South, or whether they would vote for Lincoln and knowing that that might bring on a civil war and would move against slavery. And it was a very tough election. It was a very close contest, but Lincoln won every single Northern state. And that created the whole concept of a solid North to oppose the South and the Civil War, and led to the Civil War and led to the country we have today. The next important election was really in 1896, when the Wall Street and the financial community backed the gold standard, and the populists from the South and the West, the farmers, wanted us to use silver as well as gold to permit the currency to inflate. And it really became a fight between the farmers and the industrialists. And while everybody's heart goes out to the farmers, the industrialists won, and thank goodness they did. Because had they lost that fight, we probably never would have had the extent of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. We wouldn't have had the enormous surge that led us to become really the most powerful economic nation on earth just a few decades later. The next crucial election, of course, was 1932, when, coming out of the Great Depression, or still in the Great Depression, the country turned to Roosevelt and defeated Herbert Hoover for re-election. And obviously that was very important because it led to the whole modern economic and regulatory structure that we have in the United States. We as Republicans and as conservatives don't want to go back to the time before the New Deal, when securities were unregulated, commodities trading was not regulated, there was no effort to make sure that banks were solvent and were sound, there was no regulation of labor standards, there was no minimum wage and maximum hours, there was no pension for the elderly. When you got old, you just either died or went into poverty, no provision for the disabled. Really a very, very different country from the one we have today. And we do have the New Deal to thank for it. It postponed our recovery from the Great Depression, but it did accomplish very important changes in our country. I think the next important election was 1964, when really the whole issue of race and civil rights became front and center, and the country really had a referendum on whether or not we would continue with aggressive enforcement of voting rights and civil rights. Johnson, who advocated that, defeated Goldwater, who voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that led to the Voting Rights Act of '65 that empowered blacks throughout the United States and got rid of the racist voting system and ultimately led to Obama's election. I think the next and the last crucial election we've had since 2012 was in 1980, when Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter and brought to a screeching halt the growth of government, the expansion of the public sector, the growth of regulation that had really begun in the 1930s. Truly, the New Deal lasted from 1932 until 1979. In 1980, Ronald Reagan changed it and ushered in the global free market consensus that we have today, and at the same time ushered in the policies that led to the defeat of the Soviet Union in the Cold War. In my judgment, Ronald Reagan is a president on a par with Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Franklin Roosevelt as among the greatest presidents we've ever had. He won his war and he turned this country around. Now, as we go into 2012, we've got to work. We've got to focus on how to get involved and how to stop Obama's re-election. Because make no mistake about it, this election is, by far, the most important election of our time and our last chance to save the United States.